Well, I am Patrick Moore. I am the director of the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh, and I can't think of a nicer way to spend my Friday evening than with the Portrait Society and the board of the Andy Warhol Museum, as well as friends, and with our two really special and generous and wonderful friends, the Bennetts. Um, I want to do a short introduction, and then Steve and Elaine are going to walk us through their collection, and I'm going to interrupt them rudely to ask them questions because there are a lot of these works that I'm interested in and I want to know more about. So for a short intro, Stephen Allen Bennett and Dr. Elaine Malati Schmidt established the Bennett Collection of Women Realists in 2009. The two collectors limit their collection to figurative realist paintings of women by women artists. The collection includes work by some of the most exciting women painters currently working: Margaret Boland, Alea Chapin, Andrea Couch, Alyssa Monks, Katie O'Hagan, and dozens of others on the cutting edge of figurative realism. Stephen and Elaine have chosen to limit the Bennett collection to works of women figurative realists to celebrate the fabulous work that these women are making, as well as to counteract gender discrimination against these fine art painters. It is Stephen and Elaine's hope that their collection will encourage and enable women painters to pursue figurative realism and likewise encourage others to collect figurative realist work. So welcome, Stephen and Elaine. I think you're already part of the Warhol family.
Thank you very much.
We want to thank you once again for your support of FemTouch, currently on view at the Warhol Museum through Time Tickets and up through January. So Stephen and Elaine, you're looking very handsome and elegant in this cover slide that we're enjoying here in front of your collection. Before we get started, can you tell us where you are this evening and where you're talking to us from?
San Antonio, Texas, where summer has finally started to wane. We went from 112 degrees, I guess, on a Saturday about 4 weeks ago, and now we're seeing 80-degree, 90-degree days, which looks like autumn for us. So we're pleased to be here, and it's a bright sunny day here, but not too hot, about 85 degrees.
Oh, good. Well, the leaves are turning here, and the pumpkin patches will soon be open. So fall is in the air here as well. I wondered if we could turn to this lovely presentation that you've put together. And as I said, I'll interject myself throughout, but I've already asked you a few questions that you've kindly answered by your selection of work. So I'll just jump in, if you don't mind, as we go through. How does that sound?
Terrific. Please.
I will turn it to you then.
Well, there you go. There's a portrait of us that was done by Katie O'Hagan. Katie is a figurative realist painter in mid-career. That painting is life-size and stands about 7 feet tall. And it was done about 3 years ago. And it's unique insofar as the painting on the wall immediately behind me is a self-portrait that we also have in the collection of O'Hagan. And so it gives you a little sense of some of the work. The painting to the left, which we will talk about, and you can see in the painting of the painting, is a painting by Andrea Couch, Kowch, who's another very extraordinary woman painter working today.
You know, having one's own portrait painted is such an interesting process. Why did you select Katie, or did she select you, and what was the process of sitting for the portrait?
We selected her. She happens to be one of our favorite artists. We own a number of her works. She flew in to San Antonio, spent a couple of days with us. We were friends of hers once we started to collect her work. She knew us, she knew our personalities, she made a bunch of reference photographs, and then she disappeared for a year. And one day we got a call and said, here's some photographs of the work, and what do you think? And that was what happened. So it turned out to be a really nice portrait, and it's one that we admire. I would like to say that she made my wife look older than she really is, and she made me look younger.
Thanks.
Well,
Actually, you look younger than you appear in that portrait, that's all.
I see.
you both look great, and she did a great job.
She did do a great job.
So to give you a sense of the work we collect, this next slide kind of shows it. The painting on the left is a self-portrait by a woman named Peggy Bacon, who nobody today has ever heard of any longer. Peggy Bacon was probably the most important caricature artist of the early to mid 20th century. She was the Al Hirschfeld, if you remember him. Al Hirschfeld was also a caricaturist who succeeded Peggy. She had a wicked sense of humor, and this is a self-portrait of her in the living room as her love interest reads the newspaper and ignores her. At least that's our theory about the painting. The painting in the center is by Roberta Coney, an Italian woman who does these huge portraits, and we'll talk about scale in a second. The third painting on the right is by Haley Hasler, who lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, and does these wild self-portraits of herself in a variety of domestic situations. And what we didn't do in preparing the slides was make the paintings to scale relative to each other. And the reason we didn't do that was because it's very jarring visually to have big work and small work side by side. But the next slide might give you some sense of these paintings. Peggy Bacon's painting is on the left, and then there's Peggy herself in a photograph from the 1940s. In this case, instead of nude in the living room, she's clothed in the living room. And then Roberta Coney's Sophia #1 is shown on the right in situ. And so you get a sense of the relative size of these works.
They look beautiful. And I should just remind everyone, if you have a question as we talk, please put the question in the chat, and I will relay it because I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. I just wanted to ask you guys, when was that Peggy Bacon work painted? What years was it?
According to the person we acquired it from, we acquired it from someone whose mother was Peggy Bacon's close friend, and to whom Peggy Bacon gifted the painting. It was done in the mid 1940s. So the portrait on the left and the photograph in the middle in this slide are probably contemporaneous, or nearly so. Nearly so. And what's interesting is if you look at it carefully, it's clearly Peggy Bacon painting herself, and the living room that is in the painting and the one that she's portrayed in the photograph are probably the same.
You know, throughout tonight, one thing I want to ask you about is this idea of women representing themselves in these works. And it appears from this picture that Peggy is not clothed or unclothed, is not a shrinking violet, that she is a woman who seems to have some power. And that picture, if we could go back to the previous slide, it has a very, it seems to have a lot of comments on power dynamics. And why, why do you think that she portrays herself as nude with a man who seems to be ignoring her?
When you see the painting, it portrays humor. So we think she was in the middle of a divorce and she's saying, okay, I'm standing here trying to entice this man and he's more interested in the newspaper than in me. So when you actually see it, it comes across, there's an element of humor in it. Whimsical maybe. It's actually one of my favorite paintings. Every time you walk by it, it makes me smile just because she's kind of like, oh, well, you know, I'm trying, he's not taking it, and goodbye. So
I love that explanation of the painting. It all comes together knowing that.
So when we were trying to decide what we were going to collect, it was kind of a blank easel. We thought about collecting photographs at one point, and then we thought about collecting stamps and enlarging them. But as we read, especially Steve read, we ended up just landing on women painting women. And there were a lot of reasons. We liked a lot of the work of the artists. We wanted to promote figurative realism. We really wanted to support women painters. In Virginia at that time, there was the first women painting women weekend where 10 women got together at the beach and produced a shore that was shown in Alexandria the next year. And that was almost the beginning of the women, figurative realist women kind of having more of a voice, a joint voice. We want to show what women are capable of, slice a little bit of art history, and as we've gone on, we started in one place, and then as you do when you collect, you kind of add to the puzzle to make it richer and denser as you go along. So we have about 200 paintings in our collection. The latest painting is a COVID painting, so it was completed in June. We have 71 living artists and 9 dead artists. The largest painting is 15,000 square inches. It's 18 feet wide, 71 inches tall. It's a triptych. And the smallest one we think is 7 inches by 5. And the largest number of paintings by one artist, we have 14 by one of our
painters, right?
Yeah.
So given all of that, I assume that you ran out of wall space a long, long time ago.
We did. We did. And so we rotate things out. And we have the racks, like I'm sure you do at the Warhol, and climate controlled, and dust controlled, and everything else controlled. Yes. And it's kind of sad because you have to say goodbye to some of your favorites because you have to rotate it. You can't always, as Steve tells me, I put them up and keep them there forever. And he's the one that's always saying, no, I need to change them out.
And what came first? The Bennett collection came before the Bennett Prize, right?
Yes.
So how did the collection inspire the prize, or how were those two related?
It did? Go ahead.
Very closely related, because we like to get, if they want to, we like to get to know the artists, and sometimes we'll write and say, what's the narrative behind it? What were, get some historical or factual context for the painting. And so we began to know women artists, and they would tell you their stories about trying to balance 3 children, 2 jobs, and and I never want men to think that we don't understand that they have challenges too, except we were talking to women who are having challenges. And so we went on a studio visit, and afterwards we were talking about it, and we decided that maybe a small thing we could do to help would be to start the prize. And so that's where it came from. And it took about 3 years from when we decided to do it to the first prize being awarded. It wasn't as easy to set up as one might think it would be. But
yeah. Well, thank you for what you're doing for women artists, and it's a great service to the field. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you for being a juror.
You're very
Yes, you are going to be one of the jurors in the second iteration of the Bennett Prize, which will be issued in 2021, March, I think, of 2021. So it's all good.
It is indeed.
We're excited, and we're excited that you're part of it.
Thank you very much.
So in this slide, this is a couple of examples of the breadth of the figurative realist work. The painting on the left, Wild Horses, is by Julie Bell, and Julie Bell and her husband, Boris Vallejo, are probably the greatest science fiction and fantasy artists alive today. And Boris Vallejo is in the same category, if you're into science fiction and fantasy illustration, as Frank Corbin. There's a whole series of Richard Corbin, Frank Frazetta. I had it wrong. Richard Corbin, Frank Frazetta. There's a whole series of these artists. And Julie started as an artist model and learned how to paint watching Boris, and then became an artist in her own right. And she frequently does scenes of animals and female figures, or celestial, kind of celestial fantasy with women contained in them. And the painting on the right is by a very well-known, not in the United States, but in Norway, Ingebjørg Støyve. And Ingebjørg's work is highly sought after in Norway, and we're told that the line when she has new work, she shows it at her gallery, and the line will be 3 blocks long with her fans going to see it. And we love this painting. It's not clear what's happening out of the picture frame, but the dog is clearly paying attention to something out of the picture frame, as is the sitter. And the painting on the back wall is, I believe, a characterization of a painting by Edvard Munch. So
Well,
these
that
are
would,
just
that would
examples.
certainly make sense. I was on the phone with the Munch Museum today, and of course it's based there. Maybe my eyes aren't very good. I was thinking maybe it was a Picasso. So it's interesting to hear that.
It actually is a couple. If you get up close, it's a couple in an embrace. And I haven't done the research. I haven't done the research to tell you exactly which painting it is. I should know. Shame on me.
Write it down.
Yeah.
Look it up.
Look it up.
So these are samples of some of the earliest pieces we purchased. The one on the left was actually the second piece we acquired. And as you can see, they're fairly straightforward.
It's fairly straightforward, and I think as our abilities and our taste evolved, I think the work became a little more complex. Here's an example of later acquisitions. And one of the philosophies we evolved as we became collectors was that we wanted to acquire work that demanded that you look at it, that insisted that you pay attention to it. And so these are 3 examples by 3 really extraordinary women in figurative realist painters. Margaret Boland, who's probably one of the most experienced painters, her figures always contain, she covers everybody, whether it's black or white, with pancake makeup on the face, and that's part of her theory that every human being wears a mask as part of their personal projection. And then there is, this painting was the one that appeared on the left wall behind us in the portrait of us as a couple that was on the front slide. And then this third work on the right is another work by O'Hagan entitled Alteration. And the theory behind the painting is, if you look carefully, there's tape measures and trimmings and this sort of thing. Her theory was that when you go to school, hence the school desk, your personality is altered to fit the demands of civilized society. And that's the message that I think is contained in the painting. And
it's so interesting to look at these 6 pieces as a kind of representation of where you guys have gone as collectors, because with the first 3, you're sort of dazzled by the technical skill of them. You know, they elicit that tired comment about figurative realism. Is that a painting or a photograph? You know.
Yeah.
But the third 3, especially the 2 on the left, you can see, I think, this kind of growing interest in emotion and inner state as being reflected through the kind of externals, and this loosening of what you're interested in, a broadening of what you seem to be interested in now.
Yeah,
That's true.
I think there's truth to that. Just to give you a sense of scale, here we go again. And what's happening on the left is that there was I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I'll go back. There was a show of Andrea Coach's work. By the way, that is Andrea on the far right in the photograph, and the work hanging on the wall in the museum. And then on the right, we paid a studio visit to O'Hagan when Alteration was being painted. And it gives you a sense of both the size of the work, as well as if you looked at the photographs of the work in progress, all the changes that she made as time went on. Arms moved, bodies changed, locations of items were altered, and so forth. So it's an interesting insight into the process.
From the very beginning of your collecting, did you always have or often want to have a relationship with the artists and to know them personally?
I think we did.
Mm-hmm.
We're people. We like relationships, and artists are certainly, as a group, fascinating individuals with great stories, and so yes.
Yeah, I think it's true. You want to talk about those?
We can.
Well, these are, this is another painting by Andrea Coach. She did a whole series of these rustic farm interiors where there's something wrong. You see these women working away in domestic circumstances, but there's always some external tension that is intruded. If you go back just ever so briefly to look at this painting is loaded with is loaded with angst, right? I mean, what's in the barn and what is this woman running away from? And the storm is coming, and her hair is blowing to the side, and it's obvious that there's something distressing going on. And then you get to here, and the dog is growling, and these crows have flown in through the window, and nobody looks happy or satisfied. This is one of those paintings that just, it demands that you look at it, but you can't quit thinking about what's happening and why it's happening. Now, the painting on the right is by an Afro-Cuban American, Harmonia Rosales, who has taken all of not all, but certainly a number of religious scenes, commonly known religious scenes. This is the Sistine Chapel. I'm going to ask you if you have your microphone on, if you would mute yourself, please. So this is the Sistine Chapel, and in this instance, she has taken the creation of Adam and substituted for God the Father an African-American woman of a certain age in a pink house dress surrounded by black cherubs. And instead of a male, a white male, the creation in this case is a black female. The painting, when it was first unveiled, caused quite a stir. It was interesting. A lot of the religious, I think the religious conservatives were offended that it was in some way a sacrilegious retelling of the story. I think there were some commentary that by African Americans that weren't kind to the painting, but we thought it was a wonderful piece of work and a cutting edge thing that we were pleased to own. And she's a wonderful painter and a nice person too.
And certainly an image that's very current today.
Yeah.
Certainly it has a whole lot of currency in our world today, for sure.
So there are numerous fault lines along which we collect. Some people buy paintings for investments, some buy only paintings they love. Some living artists versus Steve always calls them dead girls, which I always go, oh, dead women.
It offends my wife, and I apologize.
I keep trying to teach him, but big works versus small works, understandable versus enigmatic, he said, she said. So there are lots of different fault lines that we collect around.
You want to explain he said, she said?
If you happen to be a couple, we don't like all the same paintings. And we'll get to that a little bit later of how we negotiate that. So these are just, again, former paintings that are in our collection.
And they exemplify some of the fault lines. By the way, the categories aren't mutually exclusive. You can have a love affair with a painting that's an investment. The other two, living artists versus dead and big works versus small, those are mutually exclusive. You're either living or dead, or it's big or it's little. But for investments, some of the paintings we own are investments, but they were love affairs when we acquired them. We've never really acquired work because we wanted to make money. I don't think we've ever bought a painting and said, golly, this is a great bargain. We hate the painting, but we're going to acquire it, right?
Elaine's remembering one, maybe.
I am, but I'm being smart and not mentioning it.
She loves to do this to me. She loves to do this to me.
I didn't say anything, did I?
No, you bit your tongue. Anyway, talk just one sentence about each painting.
The one on the left is an MFA student at NYAA. So she's young and just at the beginning of her career.
Ditto for number two.
Ditto for number two. Alicia, I think, is a couple more years into her career.
Might be a fellow or a recent grad of NYAA.
Candice Bohannon is mid-career, and she's married to a well-known male artist whose name is escaping me.
Julio Reyes.
Julio, yeah. And then the one on the right is Montserrat Gudial, and she's Catalonian. And she is deceased. She's representative of someone who's deceased. But in Catalonia especially, she's kind of a political hero. She made political statements back before, and as you all know, Catalonia is still fighting to separate from Spain. So we have acquired 5 paintings by her, and you'll see another one later on, but we like her work very much.
So here you go. This is
Quite a pairing here.
well, we love both of these paintings. One of them's clearly an investment, and the other one is not.
It might.
Well, is not yet apparently. Let me correct myself. It's not yet apparently an investment, but this young woman, Rachel Mosley, does these really cool 1/2 and 3/4 figure portraits frontally, and they are fabulous, fabulous work. I mean, she's really got the moxie of this woman down. On the other hand, the painting on the right is a self-portrait of Artemisia Gentileschi, who's the hottest ticket in historic women painters today. She's the great-grandmother of the great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of every woman artist working today. She was the first woman to actually create her own work and sign her name. She also happens to be the first woman who was admitted to the Florence Academy as a painter.
And her father was an artist who supported in her efforts, because otherwise she wouldn't have been able to paint live models. Only men could paint live models, and so he would hire the models and then allow his daughter to paint them too.
She had 2 brothers, I think, who were also painters, but Dad, when he realized that the daughter's talent far eclipsed that of the boys, he started to train her in the studio. And what's interesting, when you go back to the inception of women as painters in their own right, what you find is they all had a father who was a painter who wanted to promote their careers. So he broke all the rules. He let her sign her work. He trained her in his own studio. He gave her access to the models, which is just an example of what this whole business is about in terms of getting women started. And these are a couple of examples. But one painting is certainly an investment. The other one might be an investment, but we love them both.
They do look fantastic together. We had a question come in, which is, your taste has evolved, as it does for all collectors. As it evolves, do you have a tendency to hold on to everything you collected early on, or do you de-accession work to buy new?
We've held on to everything so far.
We've never sold a painting.
Because it's a small, the other thing is, when you get to know people, you have to consider feelings. And so it becomes more complicated if you develop relationships with artists.
Yeah, we've tended to, this raises the question of collecting mistakes. And we've tended to not make them in our own judgment. Now, some curator may think we're a bunch of, all of our choices are horrible. But in our own minds, out of 200 paintings, we sat in bed one morning on a Saturday and said, how many collecting mistakes do you think we've made? And I think our sense of it was that out of 200 paintings, 8, 10, 12? 12 paintings that we would not acquire again, which I think is pretty good, pretty good batting average, at least in our own heads. Now, it may well be that all of it's junk and nobody likes it, but we like it, right?
Well, taste is by its very nature subjective, and the fact that you still love that many of the works that you have is a really good record, and you will be the most beloved of collectors among artists for not selling the work later on. So I'm sure they really appreciate that.
We hope so.
You want to talk about these?
Again, investment versus love affair. The painting on the left was done by a woman who actually ended up being one of the Bennett Prize finalists the first time around. She trained as a cartoonist, and she did computer games before moving into
Fine art.
fine art. And then on the right, I've always loved Mary Cassatt, and this is an interesting collecting story. Absolutely loved her, you know, so I had the print that I framed myself, that I kept for decades. And this spring, a friend of ours said, oh, there's a little Mary Cassatt that's coming up in a Western art auction. We were able to acquire Mary Cassatt, which frankly I never thought we'd be able to do. So this is one that's probably an investment, but it's really a love affair at our house.
Yeah, that's true. This particular painting, first of all, Rebecca LeVay is a well-known computer game illustrator, I think, before she became a fine artist. Her work's terrific and very, very outre, I guess. The Mary Cassatt painting is only 7 inches high and 5 inches wide, and it's a portrait of Albert Sisley's love interest. Actually, they call it Mrs. Sisley, but what you have to understand is this painting was done in 1873. She had a couple of kids with Albert, but they didn't get married until the 1890s. And so this, just to give you a sense of this, let's go to the next slide.
I'm sure everybody is already aware, but Sisley, of course, is the great French Impressionist. It's a beautiful thing, this portrait.
So there you see it in its frame, first with Dr. Schmidt holding it in front of another portrait that she is depicted in, which is actually about 120% life size. And then there's the portrait of Mrs. Sisley in her hand to give you a sense of the relative difference in the work, right? And we've assumed, I think it has been theorized by scholars, that the painting of Mrs. Sisley was a pochade, a miniature color study for a larger work. And it's unknown whether there is no larger work of Mrs. Sisley by Mary Cassatt, I don't think, that's known. This just happens to be good fortune, right? The pochade or the study exists, but the big painting never came into existence. It's also assumed that this painting was owned by Mrs. Sisley as a gift, that the two women were very close, and Mary Cassatt painted Mrs. Sisley and gave her this little painting as a present.
We were fortunate here in Pittsburgh to have quite a number of Cassatts in both private collections and then at our sister institution, the Carnegie Museum of Art. She's always been one of my favorite artists.
Yeah, wonderful story. We can't go into it now, but for anybody who's interested in the evolution of women, Mr. Cassatt, the father, wasn't too interested in helping Mary. And when he refused to buy her art supplies, she said adios and headed to Europe. And it's a great story, and I urge everybody to get into it. It's fun to know.
Well, she was a strong woman, having been born here in Allegheny County. So.
Yes.
Well, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, she actually studied it. She actually studied for a time at PAFA, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art, if I'm not mistaken. But in those days, the women couldn't paint from life. And so she headed, that was another motivation to beat feet and head to Europe. These two paintings, you want to talk about these?
The one on the left is by Elaine de Kooning. She's one of the 9th Street women. And it's called Nude with Jelly Beans. And the model was a 16-year-old adolescent who is called Denise, who worked for her. And apparently Elaine went out and bought jelly beans for her nieces and nephews for Easter and came back, and she decided she would paint Denise. This is the only nude that is left that Elaine de Kooning did. And Steve called and talked to Denise, who is still alive. She's 80,
In her 80s.
in her 80s, and she said she had hidden her private areas with jelly beans.
Covered them, actually. Hidden them, covered them.
That's what I just said, hidden, right?
Covered.
And so she thought Elaine was going to paint her with the jelly beans, but she didn't. This was the product she produced. And we said, when we found out she was, I think she was too much short of 16 or 17. Well, like now we wouldn't buy a painting that was done with a nude model who was 16 years old. That just seems a little bit on the edge. And we said, did it bother you? Does it bother you? And she said, oh, no, I think it's great. And so she's an interesting person.
There's a footnote. Denise's father was Ibram Lasaw, who was the abstract expressionist sculptor, who is now deceased, but of some repute. And I said, well, Denise, did your folks know you were painting? She said, oh, they loved it. When I took them to see the painting, my dad was Willem de Kooning's best friend. And when they saw the painting, they just thought it was spectacular. So it's part of that bohemian New York, that abstract expressionist thing that's going on in the 50s. That is just, this painting is just wild and crazy in that way.
And if we don't, again, have time to go into it, but Elaine de Kooning is a fascinating person.
Yeah.
If you want to read a short biography on her, she's interesting because she did things to support her husband, but she also did things to support her own career and have her own voice, and just how she wound those together. It's interesting. Very interesting.
She never felt overshadowed by her husband or pressured or pushed to the side because of her husband?
I think she voluntarily did that to one extent.
Well, she would sleep with men to help her husband's career.
Oh, wow.
I mean, she's just a fascinating, and now she is becoming better known. And it depends upon who you read. Some, of course, people disagree. Some people say she's as good, if not better, than Wilhelm, but, you know, I'm not going to go there. I think they're both great.
I'm trying to remember the art critic. She did a number of portraits of the art critic for, I think it was the New York Times, and his name will come to me in a second, but they were reputed to have had some kind of a relationship that transcended professionalism.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
It's so interesting to, and sad in a way, to think back to that era. It's why we're doing a Marisol exhibition next year at the Warhol, because, you know, if you look at women artists who were, at least for a time, sort of lost to art history, many of them were very savvy about how they used their sexuality, which was a necessary aspect. But Marisol, for example, was always being asked, oh, are you single? Do you have a boyfriend? You know, you're so pretty. These are comments and questions that, of course, her friend Andy Warhol never got. Well, maybe he got the "you're so pretty" one a couple of times. But you know, I think that it's really interesting, this era of collecting for women artists and what they went through to make their work.
I think it was Gerald. We're struggling here to remember the name of the art critic. I think it was Gerald Rosenberg, who she depicted and with whom she's reputed to have had some kind of a relationship. I want to talk about the painting on the right for a second. This is Alyssa Monks, and she does these wild portraits of women mixed up in the nature and and this is called Elpis. Elpis is the spirit of hope that lives at the bottom of Pandora's box, and the sitter in this painting is a living magic realist woman, pardon me, named Inka Essenhai, whose magical works you can see online. She's another well-known painter of some magnitude.
One other bit of trivia, Elaine de Kooning taught at Carnegie Mellon briefly.
Did she?
Yeah.
Interesting.
There you go. So to give you a sense of the scale of these works, there is both of the paintings on the wall. The painting on the left, that's just shown in situ. The Alyssa Monk's painting, Elpis, great painter. She's going to be a judge for the 2.0 with you, a 2.0 version of the Bennett Prize. This was when the painting was unveiled, and that's Alyssa in the photograph.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to put in a plug. The Bennett Prize exhibition is going to be in Pittsburgh next summer. It was supposed to be there this summer, got postponed till next year. And then there's talk of bringing the show that you're going to be the judge for 2 years later, Patrick. So it's called Rising Voices.
Got it.
Living versus dead.
Living versus dead. The painting on the left, the Australian figurative realism scene is quite strong for women artists. Art Deco, realism, very prevalent in Australia, and the artist on the left is Australian. And we always laugh because the title of the painting is Everybody Knows. And I'll say to Steve, well, everybody knows he said something that ticked her off, and so she's got her back to him, or she's waiting seductively for him to arrive. But we loved the way the shape of the lamp reflected the shape of the model. And then the painting on the right is by Elisabetta Serrani. Historians feel like she did the main figures and her father did the figures in the background. And again, her father was an artist, and he allowed her to paint, but she ended up not painting as much as Jenna Leschke. She ended up starting her own school for women artists, and she had about 10 to 12 women at a time that she would train.
Yeah, she's got about 200 attributed works. And thousands of drawings, but she died at age 27 in peculiar circumstances, and her father suspected the lady's maid of having murdered her. So he brought an action against the lady's maid, but there wasn't any evidence to prove it, and it's now assumed that she had something wrong with her appendix or some natural cause that struck her down, but she died at age 27. This particular painting dates to, I think, about 1660. So she was a near contemporary of Artemisia's. Artemisia died in 1653-45. So this is another example of living versus dead. The painting on the left is Suzanne Valadon. This is an interesting story. She was an artist model who taught herself to paint by watching the Impressionists. She was believed to have had a number of love affairs with some subset of them. She lived for a time with Eric Satie, the composer. Most people remember Gymnopedia, which is a well-known orchestral piece. This is called Nude on the Edge of the Bed and was executed in 1929. Suzanne had a son, Maurice Utrillo, who was a well-known French landscapist. Utrillo adopted him, but his parentage is believed to have been unknown. The painting on the right is by Xenia Hausner, a well-known woman from Austria, now I think about 70 years of age. This particular painting is done on dye bond, which is an aluminum substrate that's used for advertising signs. And it is she's a very bold paint handler, as you can see. Very different works.
They're both great, but the Valadon is really kind of smashing. How big is that?
It's on the wall behind us.
Can you throw the light, please? Just those two switches down there, just punch them at the top. I'll pick up the camera and let you see. There's our faithful collection manager, Christine Alexander, and then to her left in the photograph is the Valadon, which is 36 inches high and probably 28 or 30 inches wide. So there you go.
Beautiful, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. So
now we'll talk about big versus small. And these are 3 examples of small paintings in our collection. Pretty much self-explanatory. The smallest is about 6. The one on the right is about a 6-inch, 8-inch square.
yeah, and the one in the middle is pastels. It isn't all oil on canvas. We have oil on boards, pastels. We're not purists in that way. So this is the painting, and again, and there you see it on the wall, so you have a sense of the scale of it. This was at Art Basel, wasn't it? Art Basel. This was one of the satellite shows at Art Basel. And Amy Hill's this wonderful woman from Brooklyn who does these Netherlandish kind of girl figures, female figures with these modern cityscapes in the background, and they're just smashing. They're really smashing.
And she includes iconography in each painting, like you see John Hardy,
Ed Hardy, yes.
Ed Hardy, and Mickey Mouse.
Ed Hardy and Mickey Mouse. She always includes on these Netherlandish females modern icons.
We had another question that came in. You guys have been very involved with FemTouch. Has it inspired any new collection works or focus areas for you?
I think we are going to look on the basis of FemTouch. I think we will look at work by LGBTQ plus artists more fulsomely. One artist that is in our radar is an Australian woman named Kim Lutweiler, who is doing some really fabulous work. I think she's been a finalist for one of the famous Australian prizes, either the Archibald Prize or the Portia Geach. So yeah, I think FemTouch has given us a chance to think about femmes, people who identify as women, who were born as men, women who are LGBTQ. I think we'll look at that area more vigorously now that we know more about it, for sure.
Terrific. Good to hear.
And this is the largest work we own. It's a triptych, and it's again done by an Australian, and it's an ode to feminism. And she actually was born and raised in East Germany and immigrated to Australia. And you can see that in most of her work, there's always a kind of a militaristic undertone to it. And this is fashioned after Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, obviously. And if you look closely, like the missiles are tampons, and the schemata in the middle is a dildo, and she's got some other very strong feminine statements in it. She's actually married with 2 children, but she's a great artist. We were talking today, this is the only painting that hasn't hung in our home. We loaned it for a show in Chicago, so it was on display there for a while. And we're talking to a museum about loaning it for another show, but it's just too big for us. We don't have the wall space.
We have one wall there, it'll fit, but my wife doesn't want to take down what's there.
That's a lot of real estate for one artist.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is another big painting. This is called It Was the Sound of Their Feet. It was part of a 2013 MFA exhibition at NYAA. And when Matthew Flowers and his team, the gallerists, saw this work, they acquired or arranged to have all of the paintings taken to London, I think, for a show of Aaliyah Chapin's work in London. And this was exhibited in London in 2014, where it was acquired. There is Aaliyah Chapin in front of the work. It's 84 inches high and 120 inches wide. And there is something that needs to be said, and I'll tell you, the painting generated all kinds of commentary in the British press. Brian Sewell, a critic for the London Evening Standard, wrote, quote, "This is the figurative realism of the new American academic painter. No sympathy gentles the stark observation of every detail, nor is desire roused. Instead, this painting stimulates revulsion." I think he's wrong.
We disagree with him, but.
Well, certainly I think there's a huge amount of sympathy in the painting, and maybe not glamorization, but.
And joy.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, it hangs in our theater room. And so before pre-COVID, whenever we'd have parties, this painting always elicits a lot of discussion. And it's typically the women are saying, well, it's realistic. It's great. I love it. It's filled with joy and happiness and playfulness. But it's the men, I think, for the most part, who have a harder time with it. Like, oh, this is not the idealized female body. How come you have it hanging in your theater room? And we had a 7-year-old come with her grandma one day, and she looked at me and she said, "Why don't those ladies have any clothes on?" And Steve just stepped in and said, "Oh, they're getting ready to take a bath." And she kind of shook her head and she goes, "Yeah, that makes sense." Okay.
Yeah.
So she was fine with that.
No problem.
Well, very beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
This is typical. Steve likes edgier, and I tend to like more narrative, romantic, emotional. He likes emotional rough. I like emotional, calming and serene and loving. So the absinthe, we call it the Absinthe Drinkers. It Ain't No Sin on the left is by Pamela Wilson. So that's typical of an edgier painting that is very well done, even though it has an edgy kind
It's
of
edgy. It's a beautiful
theme.
painting in its way.
And then Zoe Frank, I used to be a school principal, and so children and schools and families mean a lot to me. And so she did the one on the right. And you can see they're very different. But we always say we're kind of like a Venn diagram. I like this over here, and Steve likes this over here. And we can meet in the middle, though occasionally we buy something just that one or the other likes. If the other person really likes it a lot, now that we have 200 paintings, you can say, okay, it will be on the wall for a while and then it will rotate out.
Well, I do have sympathy for this process. My husband's on the call, and we may or may not have had a terrible fight early in our relationship over a painting of cows.
Oh dear, oh dear, yes.
Yes, we understand that. One of our probably worst arguments was a nude that Steve wanted to hang in the entryway right when you walked in the front door. And so you got into the whole discussion of when children come over, some parents object to that. So you get into this whole, what do you do with that? So we ended up with a compromise. And this is another he said, she said. The one on the left, obviously romantic realism, done by a Canadian artist, and I grew up in Michigan. So this reminds me of going to the lake during the summer, vacationing with my family. I saw it, and it was all, you know, warm and fuzzy and positive memories. So we acquired it. And the one on the right is another Margaret Bolan, which is White Fives, which is obviously way more edgy.
White Fives is
Alice.
Alice in Wonderland, happening upon the playing cards, painting the roses red. You'll recall they wrongly paint, they wrongly plant white rose trees, rose bushes, and Mad Queen's going to behead everybody if they aren't red, so they're painting them. And this is Alice happening upon that scene. Here's an interesting photograph of the two works in situ. The painting on the right is being conserved. We loaned it and it got banged up a little bit, and our wonderful conservator came to the house and did a little touch up on it while it hung on the wall. I'll let you explain the
painting
left.
on the left is in my closet because I like to see it every day, and it was more of a purchase for my taste than for Steve's. But there is a funny story behind that. Last year, a chamber ensemble group in San Antonio that we're associated with, they were releasing a CD, and they approached us about using something in our collection for the CD cover. So Steve and I said, you try to get permission from the artist, So lo and behold, the one that's in my closet,
Yeah, I'll help you.
out of 200 paintings, as my husband said, they chose that one. So it's kind of funny. We happened to be having a fundraiser at our house, and they kind of unveiled the CD because it was for this group. And I said, oh, and it's in my closet. And so honestly, the next morning I found 15 wine glasses in my closet because people had gone looking for the actual painting. And I'm ashamed to say I have 2 closets, so it took some searching, but they found it.
You were vindicated.
I was vindicated. And
There you are. So there is your vindication, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is very true.
More he said, she said. Tell the painting story on the left.
Painting on the left is done actually by Katie O'Hagan, and it's a picture of a woman who is very well known in Beacon, New York. She's a really strong person who's been through many battles. And so she likes to show up at art shows and participate. And so Katie decided she was going to do a portrait for a fundraiser and use the Zorn palette. And the Zorn palette has 4 colors in it. And she said she did that to kind of impose discipline on her so she didn't spend weeks painting something that, you know, she needs to earn a living, right? So, and she could paint for 6 months on a painting. So she painted Ursula, who actually, Katie said she finished the painting and showed it to her. And Ursula said, no, I don't like it. And Katie said, oh, okay, okay. And so Ursula went and got her necklace and put it on, and she said, you didn't paint me with my favorite necklace. So she added the necklace, as you can see, and
the rest is history.
The rest is history. So Ursula hangs in my study because she's a very strong woman.
Yeah, I would not want to make Ursula unhappy.
No.
Ursula's great. She's a wonderful person. We've come to know Ursula, actually.
Yeah.
She's a great person. The painting on the right is a circus sideshow interpretation by Susan Anand, who is I think she resides in New Jersey. She's a designer and graphic designer as well as a painter.
Fantastic.
So to wrap up, where is our collecting taking us these days? Here's a couple of pictures of recent acquisitions. The painting on the left, which looks rather crude, is by Gertrude Abercrombie, a well-known surrealist painter from Chicago. And Gertrude was called the Queen of the Bohemians and was a very well-known figure in the jazz scene in the 50s. And in fact, there is a song written by one of the jazz artists of the era called the Gertrude Rag or the Gertrude Stomp after Gertrude Abercrombie. And then we've talked about Montserrat Gudiol, the Catalonian artist, and this is an example of her work. And they're both very collectible dead girls.
I'm very drawn to the Gudiols, maybe because of my associations with Spain, but they're really beautiful.
They are, when you come to our house and see them in person, you'll see how beautiful
They're really
they are.
very striking. They're all on wood. They're all on boards.
The
Actually.
photos don't do justice to them, really.
Then finally, these are some of the recent acquisitions. The two paintings on the left are by African-American women. Georgette Seabrook Powell, who worked in Washington, D.C. The painting's called Grandmother's Birthday. Very heavy impasto, very rough paint. The painting in the middle is by Anne Tanksley, and I think it's important. Anne Tanksley is 86 years of age. She's still living. She got her BA from the Carnegie Institute of Technology. I had a lovely conversation after we acquired the painting, and she said at the time she had been rejected from a half dozen art schools because of her race, but she got into the Carnegie Institute of Technology in Pittsburgh. She illustrated a wonderful book by Zora Neale Hurston entitled Images of Zora. And so she's a very collectible and wonderful painter, still alive and lovely to talk to. Great work. And then the final painting is Postpartum by Annika Ingold, who is a painting professor at the University of Tampa. And Annika was the first winner of the Bennett Prize in 2019. And so we invite everybody, if you're not collecting art, jump in, the water's fine. We're happy to answer any questions. It's a blast doing this. We are really excited about what we do and wish we could convince everybody to do it.
Well, I think that last image that we're looking at here is maybe the best of them all because your joy in collecting is so apparent. And I'm amazed that we found even a couple of Pittsburgh connections in your collection, so I'm happy about that.
Absolutely.
And,
quite a few, actually. Once you look, a lot of people were associated with Pittsburgh.
Yeah, well, all roads lead to Pittsburgh, you guys.
We're happy to take any questions if we have time. If anybody would like to ask anything, please feel free.
Are there any questions from anyone? You can feel free to chime in, send a chat, whatever is most comfortable. I know we had a few come in while we were talking. Anybody else? Well, maybe everybody's getting ready for their second cocktail of the evening. It is Friday night after all.
And dinner, probably.
Time for dinner, I'm sure.
But I really want to, oh, we do have a question. Do you have a drawing collection?
The answer is we have tended not to collect drawings largely because we don't have anything against drawings. But they require a different curatorial approach. A drawing has to be treated differently than a painting. And we've gotten pretty good at knowing paintings and what to do with paintings and how to care for paintings. But I guess I could show one drawing. Would you hold my headset here?
This does not fit the parameters for the collection.
Yeah, well, we didn't show it, but we're going to show it anyway since drawings have come up. This is a drawing. I hope you can see there. This is a drawing by Charles White, an African-American male, and it comes from his student sketchbook and was done in 1937. And Charles White recently had a massive retrospective that was, I think, started in Los Angeles where he was based. And this is two women in the window, but Charles White ultimately did a number of very powerful commentary paintings and prints on racial justice in the 60s and 70s. And I think he spent many years as a instructor at the Otis College of Art and Design in Los Angeles. And so we don't have anything against drawings, but our collecting hasn't been focused there, although we own one or two.
Well, you two are youngsters. There's still time.
Yeah, so many works, so little time.
Well, I want to thank you for not only this evening, but your really, really generous support of the Warhol. I know that people who haven't yet met you in person are really looking forward to that opportunity when it's possible to travel. And maybe the Portrait Society will go on the road, take a road trip to Texas soon.
The doors are wide open. And for those of you that want to see the collection, the BennettArtCollection.com is the URL, and all of the work with little blurbs is contained there. And if you're a painter and interested in the Bennett, Texas or bust, if you're interested in the Bennett Prize, the call for entries is now open for the 2021 version. The BennettPrize.org has all the information. The call for entries for the Bennett Prize closes on October 16th. So if you're a painter, a woman painter, and you're interested in participating. Oh, yes, and the BennettArtCollection.com. Go to our blog radio button, and you can catch my recent interview with Patrick Moore.
Next week you can catch it.
Yes, it isn't up yet. It goes up in a couple of days. You can catch our interview with Patrick Moore in his capacity as a ascending juror for the Bennett Prize.
Well, I was pleased to have that talk, and I'm pleased to be a juror and to have the two of you as friends. So thank you very much for everything and for sharing your home and your collection with us. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you all.
Same to you all.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you.
We appreciate all of your
Bye-bye.
support. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Great to see you all.